Hello. In this video we're going to look at part 1 of the listening paper in the Cambridge English first exam. In part 1 you listen to a series of short extracts, 8 in total, and for each you have 3 options to choose from. You'll hear each extract twice. Now for this video and the others in this series we'll be using the PDF and the MP3s that you'll find in the links in the description below, and we're taking sample paper 2 as our example. So we're going to be looking at page 62 of the PDF, and we'll be looking at the second set of MP3s in the zip file that you can download. So what do you need to do to succeed in part 1 of this listening paper? Well, the first thing you need to do is to pay very careful attention to the wording of the questions themselves. You'll be given the context, and then you have to match either exactly what the person says or the idea of what they're talking about to the options. It's often the case that you have to listen for the way that the person feels or what they regret. Sometimes you'll hear 2 people talking, in which case you might have to see where they agree or disagree. So there you need to listen for what one person says, and if the other person agrees, saying, "Oh, so do I," or "I think so too," for example, that shows the agreement and that will give you the answer. As you're listening, you'll have to listen for synonymous expressions. So words and expressions that mean the same thing as you will find in the questions, but not presented in the same form. So the best way for us to see how all of this works is to do an example. So try the first task now, do the 8 questions, listen twice, and when you're ready come back and we'll look at the answers together and see what we can learn from this exercise. Okay, so in part 1, in the first question, you hear a young man talking about his hobby of rock climbing. How does he feel about it? The answer we want is C. He's proud when he copes with difficult conditions. Near the end of this short extract, we hear, "I get a huge sense of achievement when I finish a particularly demanding climb." For number 2, the answer we want is A. So what does the announcement contain? It's a change to a timetable. There is a lot of information here. We don't need all of that information. But what we will hear is when they say, "We'll now be feeding the sea lions at 2:15, that's 45 minutes later than scheduled according to your programs. So the schedule here is the same as a timetable, and that gives us the answer. For number 3, the answer we want is C. So what was the topic of the course? It was publishing. Now here, we don't hear the word publishing, but we will hear lexical items connected. So vocabulary connected with publishing. So we hear producing books, the book trade. This gives us enough information to choose the answer. Note, however, that we start to get more and more distractions after the first couple of questions. Book illustration is mentioned, but it's a friend of mine did a course on book illustration. It's not the people speaking. Journalism is also mentioned when the woman agrees with the male speaker and then says they need an editor for the sports page on the student newspaper, and I think I'll go for it. So that mentions journalism, but it's not connected to the course that they're actually taking. So the answer we want is C. Be careful of those distractions. Then for number 4, we have to listen for the agreement between speakers. The answer we want is B. Reviews of the film they're talking about weren't accurate. So the man starts by saying, "I had mixed reactions really. From what I'd read, I expected it to be funnier." So he's giving an opinion about his reading, so the review. She then says, "I know what you mean." Just shows how different people's tastes can be, I guess. So she is agreeing with his opinion. So there we go, we've got that agreement. Then for number 5, what is the purpose of the project? We have to listen for the overall idea, but we can get the idea or the answer from what he says specifically. And that is C, to stop shopkeepers using plastic bags for customers' purchases. So he says, so I got all the retailers in the town together and showed them a film I'd made on this subject, and as a result, they've agreed to use paper bags instead of plastic ones. So the purpose is the result that we can see just here. Then for number 6, you hear a man talking on the radio about salespeople. What does he say about them? The answer we want is B, they keep one objective in mind at all times. He says, you need to remember the seller is only interested in closing the deal. Only interested is the one objective. After that, he says, at its most extreme, salespeople will even attempt to mirror the body language of the buyer. And this seems to be about forming good relationships, but it's not. It's not A. That's just a distraction. Then for number 7, you hear 2 friends talking about a student website, and again, we need to listen for what they agree about. You might have noticed by now that the questions are getting slightly harder as we go through. Question 4 was something about matching agreements as well, matching opinions, but the distractions weren't very strong. However, now that we're on to number 7, it's a bit more difficult to listen for exactly the right answer because everything is mentioned. Only one part of it, though, is correct. So, you listen to these 2 people talking about the website. The man says they must have got someone in from the design department to work on it because there's some real improvements. It's not so dull. So this is his opinion about it being visually attractive. Then she says, especially the artwork on the homepage. And this is showing agreement, and that gives us the answer. They do mention advertisements. The woman says at the start, I thought if they'd got sponsorship from local companies, there'd be too many advertisements, but it's okay. So we see that connection, but it's not an agreement. And it also says it is easy to navigate around in the question, and here the man says, okay, so long as it doesn't get too complicated and you waste time figuring out how to get to the page you want, which seems like it's connected with navigation. It is, but it doesn't show agreement between the 2 speakers. So again, it's really important to look at the question carefully and ignore the distractions. Finally, in number 8, you hear a chef talking about taking part in a cookery competition. What did he find surprising? Again, he's going to mention more and more of these things, but the thing he found surprising was C, how tired he felt. At the end of his talk, he says, I hadn't expected to be so worn out. If you hadn't expected something, it shows surprise. Okay, so that's it really. For this one, you need to listen carefully for synonymous expressions, for language around the topic, for agreement between the speakers when that happens in the question, but most importantly, always to listen for the information connected with the question. In the next video, we'll be looking at part 2 of the listening, which is the sentence completion task. Until then, thank you.